Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of House of Cards Season 4. This video is where I review Season 4 of House of Cards as a whole. If you would like more detailed reviews of the episodes in Season 4, you can check out the reviews I did on Season 4 episodes in batches. I'll put a link in the description below for those. This video is where I give a quick overall review of Season 4 as a whole. So I'll have to give a spoiler warning for House of Cards up to Season 4. If you have not seen all of Season 4, you may not want to watch this video. Otherwise, some things may be spoiled for you. So as I said in my episode reviews, I did really like House of Cards Season 4 much better than Season 3, as I was not a huge fan of Season 3 and in fact stated that if Season 4 turned out just as bad as Season 3, I would probably quit the show altogether. However, thankfully Season 4 did completely win me back. That being said, is it a perfect season? No. In fact, I would probably say it's not as good as Seasons 1 and 2. Season 4 had a really strong start to it with a group of episodes that had me on the edge of my seat with the infighting between Frank and Claire, which was far more interesting than I thought it would be, and all of this accumulated in an almost successful assassination attempt on Frank's life. That completely blew me away and I thought it was excellent television. However, unfortunately, after that, I thought the show severely dipped in quality, focusing on the rivalry with the Republican candidate, which I didn't find nearly as exciting, and worse than they reintroduced elements of Season 3 that made that season bad, such as that stupid writer guy Thomas Yates, and focusing on Doug having a creepy obsession over another woman. These storylines were bad in the first place, so there's no need to see them again. And then, the way they decided to end the season with a storyline that made the show feel more like 24 than House of Cards, I found rather questionable. So, let me go through each character's storyline to give some of my thoughts on them. Starting, of course, with Frank Underwood. Now, one of my biggest complaints of Season 3 was that Frank came off as an incompetent loser and not the suave badass who's able to talk his way out of anything. And one of the main reasons why I think Season 4 was much better was because they brought back that fast-talking, ass-kicking Frank that we all know and love. But does this mean he always wins? No, not at all. I mean, he gets shot this season. And he's defeated several times by his own wife, and it isn't until he learns to accept that he is wrong and that he's much stronger with her as when he starts to come out on top. And he meets this match in his opponent Conway, who is just as dirty and underhanded as Frank is. But it is so great seeing Frank overcome Conway and to use his vanity against him. And of course he gets burned when his actions of the past finally come back to bite him on the ass when Hammerschmidt writes an article exposing a lot of his misdeeds. Now, instead of just moping like a loser on how much he sucks like Season 3 Frank would do, he tries to turn it around and start a motherfucking war to distract from it. Now that is the Frank that we all know and love. And of course the whole starting a war to distract from the scandal storyline is very reminiscent of the film Wag the Dog, and if you haven't heard of it, you should look it up. Very funny movie with Robert De Niro, Dustin Hoffman, and Anne Heche. But I think this is going to play out more in Season 5. But overall, I was really impressed with Francis' storyline this season. So next, let's get into Claire, and I'm going to have to be perfectly honest here and say historically she has always been my least favorite character in the show. I thought in Season 1 she was an unnecessary distraction, in Season 2 she was kind of just there, in Season 3 I think was so bad in large part due to the fact they decided to focus more on her. That being said, I actually really liked her this season and would say this was the most interesting that she's ever been. I liked how at the start of this season she started to branch off on her own and try to circumvent Frank, and when he screwed her over, she managed to strike back even harder. And even when Frank was clinging to life and might not survive, she still used that situation to her advantage to get what she wanted politically, proving that she is just as much as a self-serving manipulator as Frank is, which won him in the end, and they ended up going forward together, where she was by his side, making him stronger. However, we did get a lot of side plots with her I found boring. The big one, of course, being her relationship with Thomas Yates, but also the whole thing with her estranged dying mother. I'm sorry, I didn't find this storyline very interesting at all. So next, let me get into Doug. Oh, Doug. Doug. Unfortunately, the show didn't kill off this character as I was hoping they would. I was so pissed off with his entire Season 3 storyline, which was boring and a waste of time, and concluded in such a way that made me very powerfully loathe this character. However, I will say the first half of the season actually used him very well, as he served as Frank's right-hand man, which is where he should be and what he's always best at, instead of trying to make him the center of his own boring side plot. However, the second half of the season did try to do this with this ridiculous side plot of him feeling sorry about bumping this guy from the donor list, who then promptly died in order to save Frank's life. I'm sorry, but you have a hard time selling me that this monster would feel bad about doing this, which leads to another storyline about him having a creepy obsession with the man's widow, which I was just cringing the whole time that storyline was happening. No, I just mean no. Then we get introduced to Leanne, played by Neve Campbell, who in the first half of the season was Claire's hired gun who helped her kick ass against Frank, and I think she worked really well in this role and proved to be a very interesting character. But then in the second half of the season, when Frank and Claire joined forces again, she became kind of a useless character who was just there. And Doug's dislike of her and attempts to use Seth to discredit her was just a pointless distraction and didn't add anything to the show. As too was her eccentric friend who worked at the NSA spying or whatever, and was using the data to help Frank's campaign. I didn't even bother mentioning that storyline in my episode reviews, as it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, and it was kind of just a waste of time. And we also see this season the return of Russian President Petrov, whom I feel was far and away the best thing about Season 3, and he was equally as great this season when he acted like a flirty douche to Claire when she was trying to be serious. And the fact that she managed to overcome him did a lot to elevate the audience's faith in Claire's abilities to get things done. However, the problem with him is that he didn't appear enough. He only had brief appearances in the first half of the season, and then we didn't see him again. I think this season would have been much better had we seen a lot more of him. Also returning was Kathy Durant, Frank's Secretary of State, and I like what they did with her character, not only by making her politically opposed to many of Frank's positions, but by showing her to be a much more clever adversary than Frank gave her credit for, as when he tried to use her to secure the vice presidency for Claire, she sees right through it and successfully turns the tables on Frank. So it will be interesting to see where they take her storyline from here. However, I'm sorry, but I just did not buy that whole storyline with Frank's position at the Democratic presidential candidate being questioned at the convention by a candidate who never ran in the first place and one who had already dropped out. This was so unrealistic, it really grated on me, and I just couldn't look past it. And of course, the back half of the season saw the introduction of Frank's main nemesis, Conway, and I thought this character was fine. He was fine. I did think they focused on scenes with this family far too much, which I thought were really boring, and I could have done less with them, but I loved how he turned out to be just as devious and backhanded as Frank was, which was quite a nice contrast to his previous opponent Dunbar, who had righteousness on her side, but of course that didn't get her far in the House of Cards world. But Conway is just as dirty as Frank, and seeing him get the upper hand on Frank was satisfying, as when Frank managed to outmaneuver him, because it was such a bigger challenge and therefore a more important accomplishment. So this season saw the reintroduction of a lot of characters from previous seasons. In fact, I'd say every character of any import from the first 3 seasons made an appearance, from more of the regulars such as Remy and Jackie Sharp to those who we haven't seen since season 2, such as former President Garrett Walker and Raymond Tusk. However, some of these reappearances felt shoehorned in, like Freddy, who seemed rather pointless and a bit over the top to me, and especially the hallucinations with the dead characters Zoe Barnes and Rousseau. I'm sorry, but that was just silly. However, the most successful return of characters came in the form of Lucas at the start of the season, where honestly I never thought we'd see him again, and he got his own little storyline where I wasn't sure where they were heading with it, which led to him trying to assassinate Frank, which was believable and great storytelling. This gave way to a new storyline in the back half of the season with his former boss Tom Hammerschmidt coming out of retirement because Lucas's stirrings about Frank Underwood finally got to him. Now, in season 1 and 2, Hammerschmidt was always against Zoe and Lucas's crusade against Frank and warned them to let it go, which he was right because Frank eventually destroyed them both. So it was really interesting to see that his inability to help them weigh on him heavily after he sees them both go down and realize that they were actually onto something. So to him, it became more of a personal crusade. And personally, I found that this was the most interesting storyline in the second half of the season that had me completely enthralled. And it was great how, unlike all the other reporters who came before him, he actually made progress and was able to get Frank. This was in part because he was a better, more experienced reporter than the previous ones, but also because Frank was his own undoing by leaving behind so many enemies that had an axe to grind against him, such as Remy and Jackie Sharp. And I liked the way they were used in this investigation. However, I was unhappy about how his investigation seemed to change suddenly from being about killing Zoe Barnes and Rousseau to his underhanded dealings with Tusk, Walker, Sharp, and others. But whatever, I'll take it. I also loved how Frank was so taken off guard by this article, and it completely came out of nowhere. So, House of Cards has already been renewed for Season 5, and my biggest hope is that it is the final season, because the show could easily become another 24 or Dexter, a show that goes on for far too long and outlives its usefulness. Instead, I think it should be more like Breaking Bad and quit while it's ahead. Personally, I really want to see Hammerschmidt fully take him down. I like to see in Season 5 Frank seeming to win at first with the war tactic and eventually defeating Conway, but then being taken down by Hammerschmidt, who exposed that he killed Rousseau and Zoe Barnes. That's what I'd love for the show to do, because the show sets up an interesting dynamic where you often find yourself rooting for Frank when in fact he's a low-life scumbag who deserves his comeuppance. And I'd love to see that by having all of his misdeeds come back to bite him on the ass, nothing would be better poetic justice, which is also similar to the way Breaking Bad ended, and the show had one of the best endings in television history, so House of Cards would be wise to follow its example, but we'll see. So my rating for Season 4 of House of Cards out of 10 is a 7, very good. It had an extraordinary start to the season, but then got bogged down in too many pointless side plots and decided to end the season not by doing what House of Cards does best, but by trying to be like 24. Still, a lot to admire about the season, and overall, I look back on it positively, but hope they can correct some of the mistakes this season made next year going forward. So that's it for my review of Season 4 of House of Cards. Be sure to check out my channel, as I have many more videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, The Walking Dead, Better Call Saul, Vikings, Daredevil, and more. And be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.